December 3rd, 1912. Buenos Aires is noisy and crowded. In the middle of that everyday chaos, one mother's world collapses. Maria Giordano rushes into a police station, desperate and out of breath. Her 3-year-old son, Gesualdo, is missing. Witnesses say they saw him just minutes earlier, hand in hand with a neighbor boy. 9-year-old Cayetano Santos Godino, the quiet son of an immigrant family a few doors away. Police go straight to the Godino home. Inside, they find Cayetano. He's not frantic. He's not confused. He's sitting at the kitchen table, legs dangling, calmly eating. His mother insists he's been home since 2 p.m. The shop ledger, witnesses, and the clock say otherwise. The next morning, workers find Gesualdo's body behind an abandoned house. He's been strangled. The rope around his neck is tied in a strange, distinctive knot. Soon, the small boy with the calm face and oversized ears will admit something that shocks even hardened investigators. This was not the first time. To understand how a child becomes capable of this, you have to look at where he came from. Cayetano Santos Godino was born in October 1896 in Buenos Aires, the youngest of 8 children. His parents were poor Italian immigrants trying to survive in a harsh city. His father suffered from advanced syphilis, a disease that can attack the brain and cause mood swings and violent outbursts. At home, Cayetano grew up in a cramped, unstable environment with a sick, aggressive father and an overwhelmed mother. School records already showed that something was wrong. Teachers noted that he often arrived with bruises and head injuries. When they asked what happened, he said he fell. He struggled with basic learning and focusing. As the years passed, the comments got darker. Kills birds during recess. Torments smaller children. Shows no remorse when punished. Today, those would be major warning signs. Back then, they were just notes on paper, stamped, filed, and forgotten. No psychologist, no social worker, no intervention. By 1904, when Cayetano was around 8, the cruelty moved from animals to other children. Police records describe a 2-year-old boy named Miguel, found partially submerged in a horse trough, seconds away from drowning. A passerby pulled him out just in time. Witnesses described the attacker as a boy with unusually large ears. Instead of a serious response, the case was dismissed with a short note, "Child without judgment." A year later, an 18-month-old girl was found unconscious after being hit with stones. Her mother pointed to the Godino boy from down the street. Once again, there was no meaningful consequence. Cayetano was simply sent home, and each time the violence escalated. In 1906, a 3-year-old girl named Maria Rosa disappeared while playing near a tinsmith's yard. Neighbors saw her one moment, and then she was gone. Posters went up. Newspapers described her blue dress with white trim. She was never found. The case went cold, until 1912, when Cayetano calmly told investigators he had tried to strangle her, failed, and then buried her alive in a vacant lot. By then, a building had been constructed over that land. Her body was never recovered. His parents, terrified by his behavior, finally tried to act. In 1908, they had him admitted to a juvenile reformatory for incorrigible behavior and indecent acts. On paper, it looked like a solution. In reality, it was just storage for troubled boys. Reports claimed his behavior improved, but handwritten notes said he kept torturing animals, and other boys refused to share a room with him. There were no real treatment programs, no therapy. Discipline was physical. Rehabilitation was mostly a word on forms. After 2 years, he was released back to his family with a stamp saying he had completed moral education. Soon after, fires started. Throughout 1911, Buenos Aires saw a series of strange blazes, warehouses, small shops, abandoned lots. Fire reports mentioned multiple ignition points and small footprints in the ashes. The idea of a child arsonist was so unthinkable that authorities didn't connect the dots. In January 1912, another tragedy pushed the city toward panic. A 5-year-old girl named Reina was standing outside a shop, admiring a dress in the window, when her clothing suddenly caught fire. Witnesses described chaos, people screaming, a police officer beating at the flames with his bare hands. Reina survived for 16 days before dying from her burns. At first, reports blamed an unknown adult man. Later, a witness mentioned seeing a boy with large ears running from the scene, but that detail never made it into the courtroom. Newspapers began talking about a wave of child murders and suspicious fires. People whispered about a shadowy predator. Almost no one suspected the skinny little boy who walked past them every day. Everything came crashing down on December 3, 1912. Gesualdo and Cayetano walked into a local shop and bought candy together at 2:20 p.m. The shopkeeper's ledger recorded both names. 10 minutes later, Cayetano was back home, sitting at the table. The next morning, workers found Gesualdo's body behind a vacant house. He'd been strangled with a rope tied in the same unusual knot seen in other child deaths. This time, the pattern was too obvious to ignore. Cayetano was taken in for questioning. Inspector Rodolfo Lartigau expected a scared child. Denials, tears, confusion. Instead, he heard calm agreement. "Yes, I was with him." Over the next 48 hours, Cayetano didn't shut down. He talked. He gave names. He mentioned dates. He drew maps. Investigators compared his statements to old case files. Again and again, the details lined up. When asked why he killed little Gesualdo, Cayetano said, "I killed the Giordano boy because I liked him. I wanted to see him dead." When they asked if he understood what he'd done, the transcript notes that he laughed. If you've made it this far, you clearly value detailed research storytelling. To keep videos like this coming, please support Criminest. Hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe with notifications on. It tells the algorithm you want more long-form, respectful true crime rather than shallow shock content. News of Cayetano's confession spread rapidly across Argentina. Courthouse corridors that had once echoed with routine arguments now filled with whispers and the rustle of newspapers. Reporters gathered outside the police station, and headlines stretched across the front pages in bold letters. Newspapers gave him a nickname, El Petiso Orejudo, the big-eared little man. Front pages showed exaggerated drawings of his ears in tiny frame, turning him into a mix of demon and cartoon, a caricature people could point at instead of facing what he really represented. It was easier to see him as a monster than as a child everyone had failed. Families of the victims demanded the death penalty, even though the law didn't allow the execution of minors. The public was furious and looking for answers. For someone to blame, for some assurance that this kind of horror could never happen again. In the middle of that anger, the courts turned to doctors. Specialists were brought in to examine him. They sat across from this slight boy with the calm stare and asked simple questions. Do you know what death is? Do you know what happens when someone stops breathing? Do you know what it means to kill? The answers chilled them. He knew what killing was. He understood it was wrong and illegal. But emotionally, he didn't care. No guilt, no empathy, no regret. To him, the difference between life and death seemed like an interesting fact rather than a moral line you never cross. One expert called it moral insanity or moral imbecility. Someone who understands rules and consequences but has no inner moral breaks. Others argued about labels, but they all agreed on one thing. This was not ordinary childhood mischief or bad behavior. Something in him was fundamentally broken, or perhaps never formed at all. In 1913, after a sensational trial filled with reporters, uniformed officers, and grieving parents, the court reached a verdict. Cayetano was found guilty but legally insane. He was sentenced to indefinite confinement, first in an institution for minors, then when he was older, in the National Penitentiary. He would never be a free person again. For the rest of his days, his world would be walls, bars, and watchful eyes. If prison was supposed to reform him, it failed. The environment changed, but Cayetano did not. Reports from guards describe him as small, restless, and constantly looking for ways to provoke others, as if testing how far he could push before someone pushed back harder. Inside, he kept doing what he had always done. He targeted weaker creatures. He mutilated birds that flew into the yard, quietly watching how long they struggled before they stopped moving. He drowned rats in his drinking water for entertainment, then dumped the corpses aside with indifference. One report says he poured boiling water over another prisoner's cat while laughing. The pattern was the same as it had been outside. When he felt powerless with adults, he turned his attention to whatever was smaller and easier to control. Doctors tried isolation and early sedatives, but nothing truly reached him. He was briefly sent to an asylum for the criminally insane, a place meant to be more medical than punitive. But even there, he remained a danger. He set his mattress on fire and nearly killed another patient, forcing an emergency evacuation of the ward. Within a short time, he was sent straight back to the main prison, considered too violent and unpredictable even for a hospital built for violent men. Outside, his name slowly shifted from headline to legend. Parents used El Petiso Orejudo as a warning story, Argentina's bogeyman you invoked when you wanted your children to come home before dark. Behave, and some would say, or El Petiso Orejudo will get you. In whispered stories, he became less a real person and more a dark symbol of the city's dangers. Inside, though, he was just an unpleasant, dangerous inmate that nobody trusted. On November 15, 1938, it ended. Cayetano Santos Godino was found dead in his cell at 33 years old. The official cause of death was internal bleeding from severe head trauma. Other prisoners said he had tortured and killed yet another cat and ignored their warnings. That night, someone, or several people, beat him to death in his sleep. There was no long investigation, no national debate, no public outcry for justice on his behalf. For many, it felt like an ugly story closing itself. He was buried in an unmarked grave in a prison cemetery. No ceremony, no family, no marker. His exact resting place is unknown. Even after his death, the case of Cayetano Godino refused to disappear. His crimes forced Argentina to confront uncomfortable questions. Not just about one boy, but about an entire network of institutions that had watched the warning signs pile up and still failed to stop him. How many chances were there to stop him earlier? What if teachers' warnings had been taken seriously? His case became part of the argument for creating a national juvenile protection system, meant to identify and help at-risk children before they turn violent, and to protect other children from those who were already dangerous. Over time, new laws and institutions emerged that, in part, traced their origins back to the shock of his crimes and the guilt of knowing he could have been stopped years earlier. Medical schools began combining psychiatry and criminology, using his life as a teaching example of how poverty, abuse, illness, and neglect can warp a developing mind. Students were asked to study his file, his interviews, and his behavior, and to think not only about punishment, but about prevention. What should have happened when he first hurt another child? What systems should have been in place for families like his? Over time, his image split in two. In folklore, he became a monster, a story parents used to scare children. In academic work, he became a symbol of systemic failure. A boy who was clearly dangerous but never truly helped, a case study in what happens when warning signs are noticed but never acted on forcefully enough. He wasn't just a killer. He was a mirror held up to a city that didn't want to see its own inequality and indifference. More than a century later, his story still asks a haunting question. When a child shows us they are in pain and causing harm, will we look away, or will we finally do something before it's too late? Cayetano Santos Godino remains one of the youngest known serial killers. A 9-year-old whose crimes forced a nation to accept that horror doesn't always come from adults in dark alleys. Sometimes it comes from a child next door. Behind the nickname El Petiso Orejudo and the exaggerated drawings lies a harder truth. He was shaped by violence, disease, neglect, and a system that consistently looked away. That doesn't excuse what he did. It doesn't erase the pain of the families whose children never came home. But it does push us to ask, what happens when every institution designed to protect children, from families to schools to police to hospitals, fails at the same time? If you want more in-depth, evidence-based breakdowns of cases like this, without glorifying the killer and with the focus kept on victims and the system around them, make sure you're subscribed to Crime Nest, have notifications turned on, and hit that like button before you go. What do you think was the biggest failure in this case? His family, the schools, the police, or the reform institutions that just sent him back into the world? Thank you for watching, for supporting Criminist, and for being the kind of viewer who values thoughtful, responsible true crime storytelling.